I'm here with my friend, Dr. Will Sue. Hey, Will, thank you for joining me here.
Yeah, it's fun to see you again.
Yes, so Will's joining us from California, my home state, where I'm from. And if you don't know who Will Sue is, he's to me a famous psychedelic, I don't know, psychedelic psychiatrist, leader, influencer, change maker in the world who's doing really great things and has really been a leading voice out there in the, I cannot think of a better word for it, but the psychedelic renaissance. If anyone knows a better word, please let me know. The psychedelic industry. And Will, I wanted to bring you on because I know there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are interested in a career like yours, which is helping people in a therapeutic setting with the use of psychedelics. And then also, being a leader out there in psychedelics, writing, doing video, podcasts, TV. I mean, you've done, I think, a little of everything. But essentially, you are making your career, and I literally cannot think of better words than these. If anyone can think of better words than career in psychedelics, please let me
I don't know.
I know. It just sounds so corny, but I'm like, but it's true. Like, this is your life's work. And I know people want to understand, like, how can I break into this, or how can I start helping people with psychedelics, or how do I become a psychedelic therapist? But I would love people to hear a little bit more about your own journey and what brought you to do what you're doing now, and how you got here, and then how did you just go from being a guy who's studying this to then like exploding out there in the world as a leader in this field.
All right. I think I can get that in 90 seconds.
I know it's a lot. So. Well, if we have some, because there's always so much wisdom in people's stories. That's what brings us to this point. So we'll find something that comes up, I'm sure.
Sure. Great. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I guess, I don't know, it's interesting. I guess I do often think of myself as my training and my profession. So as you mentioned, I'm a psychiatrist. But my journey into psychedelics began, really the first time I ever really thought about psychedelics was in like 2012, 2013. So I was like in my early 30s at that time. And, I usually just tell people, because like people see me with long hair, jewelry, and piercings, and they're like, oh, this guy was always a hippie. But, at that time in my life, it was quite the opposite. I had been raised Jehovah's Witness. And so I was terrified of drugs being, something that will take me to hell. So by that age, I had only smoked pot maybe 5 times, and twice ended up in an emergency room with panic attacks. But I had not tried a psychedelic before, and I had no interest. I thought they were just very scary. And also I was raised in the 80s, so it was like all the dare and say no to drugs propaganda. But also my medical training. Even up until now, medical training says these are dangerous and addictive, and so these were the furthest thing from my mind. But it had really been a point in my life where I had just finished my first year of my internship, which is sort of the first year after you finish medical school. So every doctor has to do an internship to sort of be licensed to practice. And I had hit like a big low point in my life because I had, didn't realize until that time that I had hadn't been that thoughtful about what I really wanted to do with my life, but had just joined this hamster wheel of putting goals in front of myself, first being college, and then college being like, oh, I now I have it figured out. If I just get into a good med school, I'll be happy, and then work for a few years, get that, and be like, oh, shoot, like not happy. Oh, I forgot. Now there's this PhD that I wanted to get. So I'm like, okay, after that. But it was literally hoop after hoop after hoop. And then I get, to this place. So I trained at Harvard, and I was like literally, like I had kept putting bigger hoops in front of myself. But then I get to that one and I finish my internship and I'm miserable. Like I was depressed, I was suicidal, and I was like, shit. And I have access to the best care, arguably in the country or in the world. And I'm like, by that time I had taken 4 or 5 SSRIs. None of them had helped. And I was just like, shit. I was finally like, And I literally considered going to get an MBA. I applied to management consulting firms. I was going to go work for McKinsey or Bain. But then I was finally like, that was the first time I really entered therapy. And I noticed this pattern. Like, I didn't even know this was happening. And I was just like, I keep running towards the next thing. And it was a really painful thing to go through because I could either keep going, which in some ways was easy, but not at that point. But to not do that, to actually, we say like, just to make a change in life, but this would in a way have to be me admitting to myself that I got it wrong. And that was very painful. But at that point I was like, this is necessary, right? Because then I'm like, in the back of my mind and the forefront, I was like, I had spent decades working towards this thing, hours of my life, sleepless nights in the hospital. I was in debt with school debt by that time, but it was enough to be like, I know enough that this is not going to keep working. So, long story short, it was just like this massive crisis, in my life, again, 32, 33 at that point, and being like, I may have messed up. And so, but I thought that, that was a critical thing to be able to move on, is to say, okay, there's something really, really not right here about the way I'm living life, right? And so sort of a lot of synchronicities started happening soon after that, which I won't get into super, super detail unless you want. But like it was fascinating because at the same time as I'm going through this, my childhood best friend across the country in California, he went back to school for the first time. So he was in his first year of college. He did the opposite of me. He like partied and was in a band and worked in construction after high school. And so, but he then decided that he needed to go back to school. So he's in his first year of college, and then he gets introduced to DMT. And so this is literally happening at the same time. And he's like, Will,
DMT first, yeah. By the way, DMT first.
Yeah. I'll talk about that in a second, but it was like, for months, he's like, Will, you've got to check this out. And he was sending me Terrence McKenna videos. And I'm like, who the fuck is this guy talking about like machine elves? I'm like, you're crazy. But he's like, no, you've got to look up. He's like, they used to do research on this in the 60s and 70s. And I'm like, finally, though, I was just like, why not? I go to like PubMed, which is our search engine. I'm like, holy shit, there's a lot of published research about this. And eventually, about a year after that, so this is like 34. So this is, I think of it as sort of late for me. I ended up, DMT was my first experience, actually. So after taking one trip to California, almost trying it, I literally chickened out, flew back to Boston. And then like 6 months later, I sort of built up the courage to do it. But within within 15 minutes, my life was really changed. And not that I'm like, oh yeah, then things were clear and I was happy. No, but it was enough to be like, there's something. I remember there was like, it was warm. It was waiting for me. I had been there before. And I don't know, I also got this phrase in my head that it was more real than real. Like there was something more real about what I had experienced than this thing I was in. And I didn't quite know what that meant at the time. I was definitely like atheist, agnostic at that point. So like, I just knew something was there. And so, yeah, it was over the next few years. And then it was, again, synchronicity after synchronicity. Like the first person I met in the psychedelic community that we're talking about was Rick Doblin. He worked like 2 blocks over from the hospital I was working at that time. Like it was like wild. And someone was like, oh yeah, some guy lives down the street. He works on psychedelics. And I'm like, okay, I'll go meet this guy. I had never heard of MAPS. And I just like end up in his attic, and he's got this
his office, right?
Yeah, and he's got that massive bong. And I'm just like terrified. Because like the last time I smoked marijuana, I literally ended up in the ER. And so I'm like, anyway, that's sort of the long story short. And yeah, but he got me into the training and he taught me a ton about psychedelics and And so I really just changed my focus at that time. I obviously stayed in residency. I finished that, went through the MAPS training. Then I just started talking about how powerful these experiences were for me. And it was pretty scary in the beginning, like definitely some faculty. And now we're talking like 2014, 2015. So this is 2 years before Michael Pollan's book. I'm like sitting there at the Harvard's Department of Psychiatry talking about psychedelics. And the faculty were like, you're going to mess up your career. Don't talk about this.
Oh my God.
But I just kept going. I'm like, I can't, like, I'm not going to go back to doing this. The old way of psychiatry. And so, you asked me how these opportunities came for podcasts. And then I was on the Netflix show last year and it's just, I just kept talking from my heart. And we both know Maren Azoff, who's this amazing vocal coach. And I remember, I've known her now for a couple of years, but she was like, I would talk about Maren. I think I have a choice to talk from here or here. And she's just like, when you are there, like, whatever, and on a podcast in front of the camera, she's like, just imagine your seventh chakra connected to the heavens, your root to the floor. And she's like, just go. She's like, don't think. I'm not getting the chills because I remember her kind of coaching me before some of the big events that I had done. And it was just like, it's so powerful, to just not cloud with all these things. I'm going to, people are going to think of me this way if I talk like this, but it was just, just beautiful. And so I think, I've gotten more and more comfortable just being real, I think is what we need more. So yeah, I mean, maybe to circle back then to your original question, what do people need to work with this amorphous thing, right? The psychedelic community or psychedelic healing. And I think it's sort of amorphous, I think, for a reason, and I think I see now psychedelic sort of percolating more into culture. And it's not there is going to be, there is psychedelic therapy. I think there's going to be psychedelic creativity and artistry. I think there's going to be psychedelics and, entrepreneurship and all of it. So I think, I think it's the being authentic yourself, which is part of Marianne Williamson quote of, really helps inspire others to be authentic. So I don't think one has to be, a therapist to be a healer and to change ourselves and to change someone else. So that's my, the quick spiel. I think the more authentic we can be in no matter what we're doing, I think we inspire others to do the same.
Exactly. Yes, that's also, I don't know if you know The Big Leap. It's like one of my favorite books ever. Yeah, I mean, it's like this thin. I recommend it to all my clients. I used to buy it for all my clients, but there's a quote in it is, as we expand in, it's like success, love, and joy or whatever it is, then we inspire others to do the same.
Yeah.
You can switch those words around too. It's like, as we expand in anything, we are always inspiring others to do the same. It's like, the more abundant I become, the more those around me become abundant because of my inspiration and my stories and my, me being me and allowing them to be themselves.
Yeah.
But I have a question for you that's kind of, it's interesting because I originally gone to college for the path of becoming a psychologist, like a traditional therapist.
Yeah.
And I studied psychology and, got really interested in, because I was already working with psychedelics at a pretty young age, but I was always interested in neuroscience and the brain. But I'm curious, so you were in med school with the intention to become a psychiatrist. But there you were taking SSRIs that weren't really working for you?
So I actually was in medical school thinking I was going to be a surgeon. It was not until the entire time of the 3 years of my medical school out of the 4, and then the 4 years out of the 4 for my PhD in the middle, I thought I was going to be a surgeon. So I went from ophthalmology to plastics. I liked like microsurgery, so I was going to do like reconstructive plastic surgery. And it was like, I never thought of psychiatry. It was like my second to last rotation of the required ones. And I'm just like, I'm going to get this over with. And like, and it's such a competitive field, medicine. So if you can imagine, like I had got the right letters of rec, I'd worked with the right people. I had like everything set to be an ophthalmologist. And then literally like 2 weeks into my psychiatry rotation, luckily I was working with a particular doctor, a young trainee he was super interested in Freud and psychotherapy. And he was the first one that was really introducing like the concepts of the unconscious and Freud to me. And I was just like, by the end of those 2 weeks, I'm like, I have to do this. I'm like, there's nothing else for me. So no, it actually was not something that I had planned on doing.
Okay, that's fascinating. No, it's interesting because my first experience, I was very much like you. It's just it happened to me at a younger age, or when I was in college, and I think back then it was the late 90s, and Prozac or whatever it was just a thing. Like you're feeling sad, they just gave it out like candy. And I remember going to my college therapist or whatever, the free medical center in college, and saying like, I'm depressed. I didn't even know why. Looking back, it's probably just because I was drinking and doing drugs, who knows. But and they handed me pills like candy, because back then, and even to this day, we all know it's like, okay, that's the solution. Yeah. So when I associate psychiatry, I associate it with these people that see you for 5 minutes, hand you a pill, and then don't go over anything.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting because now we're seeing this kind of revolution in what is this new form of psychiatry and psychedelic assisted therapy, and how is this actually working? And I don't even know because I have yet to go to a psychedelic assisted therapy appointment. I've never actually done this. I've only done, like medicine ceremonies and circles.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just curious, like, how is what you do now different than that kind of traditional, the guy who doesn't even look at you and just writes you out a prescription for Prozac and says come back in,
Yeah.
a month.
Yeah.
Like, how is psychedelic assisted therapy different than that?
Yeah. And honestly, like I literally tell people, don't go see a psychiatrist because like this is what it's like, right? And sorry, I live in Venice Beach, and there's some you probably know Venice. There's some
Yeah, I know
activity
Venice.
here at the moment.
Always activity.
Sorry, someone was yelling outside. There we go. Cool.
That's great.
But yeah, one of the things I'm very proud of is I have not prescribed an antidepressant since 2015, and I suspect that that's not
Aw.
going to be anything I will do again. So
Good.
I think that there's a few things here. I think that I do think Western psychiatry, and I mean all psychiatry is Western, but people are trying their best. But I always think that psychology and psychiatry were sort of born within a culture that was already ailing, and they were used to suppressing emotion, So I think psychiatrists and the medications we developed kind of came in, and I don't think anyone thinks they're doing anything bad. It's just like that's the model that we learned from, you know what I mean? And I just think that we're seeing that model doesn't work. So it's going to take some time to unravel that, because the way I think about it, just academic psychiatry and academic medicine really, is highly influential, right? Because it's like, these are the medical journals. And honestly, in the private practice setting, like at the root, some of the root of this at least is worrying about being sued, right? And so people are like, there's standards of care that you're supposed to follow and protocols. And so a lot of people are still terrified, meaning medical doctors of psychiatry, of psychedelics. It's just so foreign. And so a lot of people, it's just like, are scared to do something wrong, or they hear these stories about psychedelics and like, what if someone jumps off a building or something? What's my liability? So, and I understand that because it's our career. But anyway, so, and for the people, if you imagine if they're in their 50s or in their 40s and they've been practicing a certain way, it would take a sort of similar shift as I had in the beginning and saying, there's something very wrong here, and I've not been doing it right for decades, right? And so it's a hard one, and I don't blame people for not being able to do that because it takes something significant, to be able to do that. So, and I've sort of introduced this concept of suppression, right? So, and I think about the categories of our medications always are antidepressants, anti-anxiety, antipsychotics. I mean, we are used to doing anti-everything. And so when I think about sort of what I do differently and what psychedelics do is that they evoke, right? They actually do the opposite. They say, let's encourage the old memories. Let's encourage the old emotions to come to the surface, right? And, then we also want to say, I mean, that's beautiful to do, sorry, but it's like, then what do we do with that, right? And so that's where I think the skill of a teacher or a healer or a therapist comes in how to help someone manage through that, right? Because the way I sort of think about it is that like something that is painful or traumatic that comes in, it's kind of like a pressure cooker. So if we think of our body as like a pressure cooker and the emotion, like the painful emotion gets injected into us, if it's not sort of released in a proper way, and by release I mean usually it's culture. Our family has said don't cry, or everything's going to be okay, and then if we don't release that, it just builds over our lifetimes, right? And again, there's very powerful reasons why we then feel like we can't express this, or it's dangerous to express it, or we're not going to be loved if we express this. And so even though psychedelics will help that stuff start coming to the surface, I mean, if in the original situation that those traumas occurred, or just the programming occurred over the course of our life, there's going to be resistance to that, so having a place, I think of the things that are critical for someone that we are with during a psychedelic experience, that someone that we trust, someone that we feel safe around, someone that's empathic and understands that, someone who is not judgmental of what comes up, someone who is, honest with us, and that's the ideal situation for anyone holding space for us, and a medical license or a psychology license does not equal that you have those things, right? They just equal that you took a bunch of tests and you studied something. But like this stuff is really like, if you think about it, it's just like what we hope that a human being should be, right? It's just we developed this entire field of psychology because we weren't able to do that out in the real world, right? We created the need for honest, trust, non-judgmental, etc. people. And so, I think about the healers that are going to really hold space for this. I'm not an advocate that it has to be medicalized psychedelics. I think we can have people who are, medically trained, but I think we should not stop healers who are doing good work with integrity from doing it outside of the medical space. And so, in the end, it's just, so what I think about what I do is I work with people and build that connection, that trust, and they'll go have a psychedelic experience and we work with it, or I work with them with ketamine or something. And we just facilitate this process of allowing whatever comes up and helping. I think of it as helping the person bear their pain, not trying to change it, not trying to define it, not trying to medicate it. Just can we allow this thing to happen and we make it through it together, sort of a thing.
Yeah. Wow, it's so interesting you say this. I had never thought of that idea that the former model, as I call it, it's like the old paradigm model, which we know is still out there because it's still everywhere. But that whole anti was just like stuff it down, hide it, mask it, and now psychedelics, clearly bring things up to the surface. And I'm curious, like when you work with clients in this, are they getting other support to help with this process? Because I know, when you go pretty deep at these medicines, sometimes the things that come up, even I last weekend, and this was no psychedelics. This is just, I'm in a training for like somatic therapy just to learn certain techniques. And but stuff that came up, I'm like, wow, I can't even believe this is like coming up when I'm sober, and it's intense, and that was in a 30-minute session. But, do your clients traditionally get outside support, or is this something that you just do in your sessions? Like, how does this work? And is there also like an end, do they have to do ketamine the rest of their lives? Or, like, does their depression ever get cured, or whatever the right word is for that?
Great question.
Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So, I think that, sorry, let me think back. You asked a few things there.
I know it's a lot, but
No, I think that in terms of my practice with people, I think the folks that I see, I'll not to pat my own back, or maybe I'm kidding myself, but no, I think that I get a number of people that will, people will either come to me because they've had powerful psychedelic experiences and they want to make sense of them, or they are prepping to go do something in the future, and so. I've spent a good amount of time with people in prep. Also, some people who hadn't considered psychedelics at all and were just seeing me for therapy, and then decide to go do it. So I guess maybe I'll say that I see people every week for an hour, everyone that I see. So I much more function like a traditional therapist or another type of healer than I do a psychiatrist. Like I haven't done like a 15-minute visit and probably almost a decade.
5 minutes.
So like, I would say the people I work with, I think this is it's a model in a way that I've developed myself. The things that I'm talking to you about, it's mostly come from my experiences with my psychedelic experiences, my healing practices with the body workers and the therapists that I've worked with, and the people that I've worked with over time. So it's sort of really just helping people, if they want to buy into my my perspective, which I think is helpful, like we work on that for a time before they go to Soltara to go do ayahuasca or something. And I have found that that the folks I work with do pretty well, and because I do, we sort of talk about what's going to come up and what it might mean. And so if there's a powerful or painful image that comes up, or sensations in the body, like how to focus back on the body, back on the breath, allow the release. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but yeah, we really spend a good
Yeah.
amount of time just what is this that we're about to go through, and when it gets difficult, what do I do? Because it's in a way, it's in those moments I feel in during an ayahuasca experience or MDMA experience, etc., that it's sort of going back to that. It's going back to that pattern that originally, or the patterns that had taken place that told us you're not allowed to do this thing. And so it's in that interface where you can sort of change the long-standing pattern, right? But there's going to be fear every time you rub up along that pattern. There's going to be intense sadness. And so it's like, when you get to that interface, what do you do? So that's kind of how I work with people. But in the end, just like you're saying with your training recently, it's not these techniques are going to work anywhere, right? Because again, it's just really helping the body do what it wanted to do naturally, but we've been stopping it to do. So it's not really just applicable to psychedelic experiences, is the way I think about it.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's amazing. So I didn't know. I thought you'd kind of see, and it's interesting. I've been hearing a lot about, like ketamine therapists who are now just giving ketamine, sending people on their way, or, seeing people, once every 5 weeks or whatever that is. And, and everybody seems to have a different approach. And I'm always wondering, like, how does this really give people the results, or is this just a new way of masking, or is this kind of just the different version of Prozac, but
Yeah.
maybe, I don't think it is, because it's completely different actual biochemistry. But you mentioned some things about the body and allowing, and this concept of preparation and probably integration as well. And that's something, on this podcast, every single guest I've had, and pretty much everybody working in psychedelics has talked about this. And I think this conversation is going to be more and more important, as every single day there's a new article in the mainstream media about, like, MDMA and like ketamine and this and that. And then it's like, well, where does this concept of integration come in? How do we effectively work with these to help heal on a deep level, but then actually go create the change where this doesn't become the Prozac, where someone needs to go do MDMA every month in order to figure out their relationship. Because I literally am friends with people who I think their marriage has only survived because of MDMA. But then I'm like, well, where does it become, like a pill versus getting to the core of the actual problem, and I'm curious about this concept of the bringing this into the everyday, like the true integration. Like, how do you feel about that, and especially as as a therapist who's also working with these medicines?
Great, and that reminded me that I didn't totally answer all the questions that you had said last time, but there's one that's related, which is you'd said kind of, it's related to how long do people have to do this? Does it become a chronic thing? So, I mean, I happen to think spiritually that, we're here in this human form and to transcend many, many things in our life. I don't think, except maybe, again, if some of us have gone enough times through, previous lifetimes or reincarnations, that this is our last one and maybe we'll reach enlightenment during this one. Definitely not me. But, meaning I think there's always going to...
I'm like, I would love to meet someone.
Meaning I think there's always continued things to transform and transcend through. I think whether or not we keep using psychedelics to do those transformations is an interesting thought. Or whether if we're almost transforming or transcending through one or two big nuggets, and that's some place where people can get stuck or keep using and just going up and down through this one instead of saying, okay, we've left that behind or left this one behind, right? And I also think it's a little bit different when are people just at the beginning, right? There's some people who just want to feel better. If you're super anxious or depressed or suicidal, you don't really have the energy or the space to think of what is my calling, right? You're just like, I just want to not suffer. And so what I find though in general is if with people who are coming in, again, just they want to just they're in so much pain, they just want to feel better, that I don't really get into like calling in spirituality and let's just get you feeling better. What I do notice is that people that use with or without psychedelics, once they get those things, and they feel better on a daily basis, they get more curious about, okay, then why am I here? Like, what is this thing all about? And what do I want to spend my life doing? So when I think of the journey, I think of it in that direction. So I don't think of it as one that's endless or that will end per se. But, I think you're asking more about the use of psychedelics. And I do think that, there's certain ones that are more apt to like having a more chronic use. And ketamine's definitely, I think, the one where you can sort of, you feel better in the short term, right? Like ketamine is a suppressor in and of itself, right? It's not really scary, especially if you do it in a controlled setting. Like it suppresses sadness. It suppresses fear, at least for that short-term period. And, so not to get too into the pharmacology, but I think there is a role for ketamine. I think that for people who are very depressed and suicidal, I think it is a very powerful medicine. And, but I'm not here to tell anyone that they have to, transcend anything in their life. It's up to them. So if some people say they live a better life doing, using ketamine once a month or once every 2 months for the rest of their life, and they'd be worse off if they didn't. I mean, that's up to them, But I do think, on the other picture of, the people that I know that I think I respect as very powerful healers, the people especially that I trust, guiding me, like that I have like no reservations about. Actually, when I think about them, they all have minimized or if ever rarely ever do psychedelics anymore. I mean, they're all also, very senior figures, 60 and above, but yeah, most of them have not done it in quite a long time, months or years. So, and if I think about my own use, it's definitely
interesting.
Decreased over the last few years. So.
It's funny, me too. And it has nothing to do with COVID. It's just like, I need less. I don't feel that draw to just go and do it every time, and now it's like, okay, I'm constantly questioning, like, well, why do I feel the need to do this again? Or what is the intention? Like, where am I going with this now? Like, what's the depth? And that's happened to me. And it's interesting. It's happened to a lot of people I know as well, where it's like, you get to a point where, especially when you're really stepping up in a path of service and healing for others, it's like, yes, you're still always doing your own work as well, but, my intention isn't so entrenched in like me. It's like, okay, well, do I need this? And there's so many other modalities that have proven to be just as powerful. It's like 30-minute somatic experience in a group of people that's just now learning it. And we were practicing on each other, and in under 30 minutes, I was like, whoa, that felt like a journey in itself, and
somatic experiences
stuff came
so
up.
Powerful. My goodness.
I know. Yeah. Do you bring the somatic work into your
Big
practice
time,
as well?
Big time. Yeah. I think, I think of it as helping people get to that place of the catharsis of releasing the pressure out of the pressure cooker. I think it's crucial, the body work and the somatic work for that specifically. Again, I keep remembering questions that you asked in retrospect, but so then, you asked about this integration, piece, which I agree. It's kind of like, it's become this like buzzword out there. I have my own process around it for sure. And I know there's, people are trying to sort this out for themselves, and I think that, I don't know, the phrase, and I heard this is a Ram Dass quote. I'm not sure if it actually is or not, which is, you can only get as high as your shaman. And so, I think about I think each healer is really can only really take someone down the process, at best as far as they've gone. It's how well do they know these different pieces of transcending each kind of area of stuckness. So it's interesting. I sort of developed my own where I sort of think about thought, words, and deeds a lot, or our mind, our voice, and then our actions. Because to me, like those three things represent how we manifest and how we change. And I think, and it, again, this came to mind simply because like I was in my own process and I was getting stuck. And the reason why I like saying thoughts, words, and deeds is because, in order, say, if we want to manifest something in the next year or two, like whether that's, the work that we want to shift, that you help people with, or if we want to be in a different place in our relationships, it takes some real thought and intention to say, this is what I would like, otherwise we're at the whim of just whatever is happening around us. And so I think of step one being like, connection to the calling and soul. What does my soul want? And I think about that at the mind level of healing, right? It's like, because we're so clouded with expectations and culture and society, it's hard sometimes to know what do I really want, or what has been programmed into me. So to me, step one when I work with people is, so let's get clear, what do you want? And the reason why then I go to voice is because, the work I did with Marin, actually, and you know Marin very well, is that you can think clearly and have a good sense of what you want, but it might be too hard to actually vocalize that to the people and the places that you need to do it with. Or you might be vocalizing things that you really are not in integrity with, and you're pushing people away with it. So I think vocal work is not just about expression, it's about withholding when you don't want. And so that's step two, because if I figure out that I want to start a podcast on psychedelic entrepreneurship in a year, if it just stays in mind, I'm not going to do anything with it. So step one, let's clear what we want. Step two, let's talk about it. Are there ways that we are blocking ourselves from vocalizing? And step three is the action. Like, are we taking the steps after that towards creating this thing that we want? And so that's a quick summary of how I approach. I'm in the process of thinking about how to write it and share it with people, because to me, it's like, people are like, oh, we'll go, draw a mandala after you're done with MDMA, or like go do yoga. And I'm just like what? These can be steps within my, thoughts, words, and deeds, right? Like if someone's working more on body and something there is, but like there needs to be a process on helping someone through. And to me, it's like having a good sense of what it is before they even do a psychedelic, have a sense of what is it that you're trying to change. Because if that's not even clear, it's like, how do we then build that into our life? So anyway, that's how I think about psychedelic integration. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful one, what you were saying about the mind, and just this initial question of, what do you want? What do you, what is in you? What's in your soul? And it's amazing how many people are truly disconnected from that, and I know a lot of this is our upbringing, our society, our trauma, there's so many factors just trying to survive, especially the last year and a half of like, okay, well, a lot of people weren't even able to think about that, but it is interesting. I get a lot of clients coming to me like this. This is essentially, I always say I'm actually a purpose coach in disguise, because people come to me at that transition point who most of my clients have worked with psychedelics, and they start to have that awareness that there's something in them that's coming out, and they're like, well, what do I do with this? There's something in me that feels like it's pulling me here. And it's amazing because so many people have not been allowed to feel their needs or even understand their needs or their wants. And then of course, taking action on it is a whole nother, that's a whole nother animal. Voicing it is hard enough as it is. And then the action is like, it's a deep process. I'm curious if do you find that, working with people when they get to that stability point, like, is this kind of the next thing that tends to come out, is like questioning life and questioning their direction? And, because that's what happened with me, like big time. It always still is. It's always of like, okay, what do I want? Like, where am I going? What's next? Why am I here? What's the whole purpose? But does that happen with your clients as well?
I think so, and it's interesting that, again, you mentioned the word stability. When a lot of people think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they always, people tend to think about, it's like, food, clothing, shelter, and on some versions of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they actually took off the highest point on the pyramid, which is the ability to express yourself, like the creativity that we're each here about. And so, when you say, again, get to a foundation or a stability, it's because if we do have lack in food, clothing, and shelter, we don't have that freedom to sit back and to process how it is that we want to to change the world or change ourselves or change the community around us, right? Because we don't have that safety, and we're, in this time and place in 2021 where we have all sorts of resources and technology, but there has been this lack of resource for quite a lot of people. And so even on the other end of the spectrum, I work with a lot of public figures, a lot of people with quite a bit of wealth, but I'd say they do not escape this either. A lot of people will get to that point and they'll achieve, kind of my version of different hoops. And then they're like, now what? Right. And so this thing about purpose
Still
and soul and
unfulfilled
calling for me is crucial. I do think that there needs to be a certain amount of again, not worrying about your safety in order to engage this. But yeah, I don't think that there's any amount of money that actually saves anyone from that sort of more of an existential pain. And so I would say a lot of the people that I work with get to that step, but I also, I don't know, I've started working. It's interesting. Like more recently, I've gotten, kind of what used to be my more traditional psychotherapy clients, where I'm working with people who are just getting in touch with, okay, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I'm feeling in my body, and learning how to like just name emotions. And at first I was like, wait, why is this happening to me? I want to keep working with the people who are out there like manifesting and creating. But I'm like, wait, this is just, everyone's at a different, part of their development, and again, I'm a believer in sort of reincarnations and that sort of thing. And so it's become more of a just meeting people where they are. So it's quite fun for me now to have sort of a variety of people that I'm working with again. So yeah, I'd say many people have gotten there, most, recently, but yeah, I'm also just like going back to the basics sometimes and just helping people feel. So.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting because like you said, it's like even when people get there, because I actually have a very similar patterning as you had, where I was like on that mission, like, success, college, this, that, money, career, and it was just kind of like that underlying unfulfillment was always there. And I remember it took some pretty traumatic events, like sudden death of my dad, like major losses, like a lot of like, as I call them, initiations, like a mystery illness, to really stop me in my tracks and say like, okay, wait, what is this all about? Like, why are we here? And actually, even at one of my, what I call like, it was almost like the lowest point of like almost about to lose it all, but it took that much to wake something up in me and question everything, and I think on some level, and especially, and then you throw in psychedelics too, it's like, you add all these things in and it's like, well, then it becomes this perfect storm of like, what is this all about? Why am I here? And even when I wasn't resourced and I didn't have the money or the wellness, but it actually forced me to actually go make some major life changes, because it's almost like sometimes when you hit that rock bottom, it's like, well, okay, I've hit rock bottom. Now I can do anything. So, I mean, not to laugh about it, but that's what happened to me. And that's where, the storm of throwing the psychedelics, throwing like major life changes and traumas and all surfacing at once. It's like, well, okay, now at least I have this blank slate, because when you get to that point of like, okay, well, maybe I've hit my lowest. Now where do I create from? Like, where do I go now? It's like, and then there's the steps and the stepping stones you mentioned. But one other thing I want to ask about that you mentioned was, this like accessibility. This is another thing that I think is, I've been kind of questioning this. And actually I did an interview earlier today that, they had mentioned like $350 ceremonies. And I was like, 350, like I've been invited to some lately that are, in the thousands, where I'm like, okay, I could fly to Peru for that much. But, and even, in the psychedelic assisted therapy and the desire for a lot of people to get help, and the desire for a lot of people to go into therapy. And there's kind of there's still such a limitation. Like there's a high demand and not enough supply. Because I know even, you had mentioned this before. I'm friends with some other people that do kind of similar work as you, and people get tapped out, like they get booked up or they have no more space, or like maybe people can't afford it because no one wants to take insurance because the whole insurance system is a total mess. And I get it. So what do we do? Like, what do you feel is the future solution to, I mean, I know MAPS and Rick Doblin have talked about this, and I know this is part of the larger scale plan of, these centers going in, or I don't even know what it's like, but like places like Field Trip who are doing like ketamine therapy. But what do you feel like is the future of
Yeah.
this psychedelic assisted therapy realm, and how are we going to make this
Yeah.
accessible to more people?
So I'm going to go back and tie back to, you were making these comments about rock bottom, which I think, rock bottom, I think about, it's used a lot in the substance abuse sort of realm of at least that's where I first heard it, in psychiatry. And, the way I think of rock bottom is it's sort of a beautiful term, because it's like there has to be enough pain in order to make us live life differently. And until that situation is the case, and, hopefully for some people, rock bottom is death. There are some people that hit rock bottoms and don't make it through. There's quite a bit, actually. And the thing is, around rock bottom, or just departed a bit from rock bottom, is comfort, right? It's safety, it's familiar. And so there's our own part of us that wants to keep us in a sense of safety and familiarity and comfort, that doesn't want to transcend, right? Because there's a part of us that has to die in order to stop living a certain way. And that only comes within us, right? There's no amount of money one can pay. If you're not willing to do it, you're not doing it. And there's a lot of people in that category. And so, or the thing, that I want to kind of tie back to is we actively are doing things to not feel that pain, right? We were talking about psychiatry and our medications that suppress, but I would say again, just saying you don't have time to do this stuff is a way of suppressing that rock bottom. Alcohol is a way of suppressing that. Again, making money, like shooting for these other external goals, are all ways that we don't allow ourselves to have enough time or space to just feel, to transcend through this stuff. And as that, so meaning, like, this thing that we're talking about, this being in a space or a rut that we want to get out of, does not require psychedelics at all, right? Like, psychedelics are now a part of what the wider culture they're becoming in the last 3 years. Like people have been healing for tens of thousands of years. So I think another way of staying in a place of comfort is saying sometimes, I can't afford it. Oh, look, I really want to do this thing, but I can't. Like look at these evil people out there charging so much money that they're keeping healing from me. Sometimes I think of that as just being another type of, I'm staying in my zone, and I'm going to say it's because of
External.
this. Okay, and I know that probably there's some people who are going to hear this and be like, no, but or be upset with me. But that's the way I see it, and it's been through experience.
It's a minority.
So, I think that one thing that I've proposed many times, I've talked about it on podcasts a lot. No one's ever, I've heard, taken me up on this. Is that if one wanted to do, again, what are the critiques, or sorry, the characteristics that we need for a safe experience? Trust, non-judgment, empathy, sympathy, and patience. Like, again, you don't need to be a mental health practitioner to do that. And I will argue that a lot of mental health practitioners who are trained don't know how to do those things, right? I mean, out of the 5, I have 5 people that like literally I would let sit for me or for a family member. 4 do not have any sort of formal clinical training. So, and what I wanted to sort of add to this is that, so this thing that I've told people to do, I was like, if you have 1 or 2 people, or a group 4 or 5 that you really feel meet those characteristics for you, that again, you guys trust each other, can hold space, can understand, get together once a week, or you can even say twice a month, and say for 2 hours, put away all the phones and say no small talk. Let's just get together in a room and talk. And if you do that, say again, if you happen to do it weekly, and then say once a month, throw in half a gram of mushrooms and sit there with the group. No phones, no anything else. No one's going to lose their shit because we're talking half a gram or a gram. And if you do this week after week after week, you're going to get tremendous healing, right? It's going to cost you nothing. It's going to cost you, like, again, a few dollars for that amount of mushrooms.
Yeah.
then no
Yeah.
one's done it. Okay,
I'm like, I
no,
want to do that. That sounds
like,
great.
this is the kind of thing. I mean, to me,
I can't find 4 friends.
yeah, I guess maybe if you don't have,
kidding.
no, but yeah, joking aside, but like, you know what I mean? But to me,
They're
that's
all
the
over
thing.
the place.
It's sort of like a little bit more than microdosing, but you're going to just open things up. And again, just agree to don't do the small talk, don't do the phone. Stuff will come up and it's free. And to me, like, that's more about just encouraging connection and openness, etc. You know, because there are not going to be enough really well-trained psychedelic licensed therapists. I mean, who knows? 30 years? Like, it's going to take forever.
Yeah.
And so, and the thing is, like, there's a lot of therapist burnout. And like, I'm like, you know, the thing is, like, for me, like, you know, I need to stay interested. For me, like, I'm interested in treating psychosomatic stuff. I want to see, you know, will psychedelic therapy work for psoriasis? I want to look at autoimmune illnesses, meaning like, you know, if one can treat, you know, average depression, average anxiety with a technique like this, where you just do it with your community, like, I think that will take care of a massive chunk of this. And leave like the super complex cases, et cetera, for the people who are trained, you know, and maybe insurance will end up covering it. So again, that's sort of a solution that I feel is, can we help people just connect more with and without psychedelics? So.
Yeah. Oh, and this is where, you know, I think just having these conversations and speaking more about, you know, even the word, I always say the word integration, you know, like you mentioned, it's like buzzword. But you know, and I still have this theory that people who work with psychedelics don't think they need integration a lot of times, but that's not the point. The point is, the more we're having these conversations about, you know, getting into your body and having the awareness and allowing things to come up and putting your phone away, you know, like things that you could be doing, like connecting in circle or get together with 4 friends. You know, these are very simple things that I think have been missing on some level, you know, especially the COVID world, you know, like, which I don't, you know, where I live, it hasn't really gotten back to normal, whatever that is. You know, there's still kind of issues getting together and, you know, there's disconnection and isolation, but it doesn't have to be this complex. And there is so much information out here now, and more people, you know, like you, like talking publicly, speaking on podcasts about, you know, these little techniques, like, you know, I mean, you can Google, like, the work I'm doing in this training program. I mean, it's Googleable, you know, it's not, there's no secret information. It's, you know, it's just someone who's gone through a lot of training, teaching other people how to do it on some level. So this is beautiful. I actually love that idea. I'm like, I would totally do a half gram
Please
circle.
Have people try it. Like, I think it's, again, I don't know, there is this interesting resistance to just doing something simple, right? Like, I don't know, I almost think about it like, you know, people hear all these stories about psychedelics, they read Michael Pollan's book, and they want to see the snake and have the conversation with the dead relative and the past life. But it's like, again, the integration is, you know, how do you change your everyday life with these experiences? And, you know, I don't know. I'll also say I haven't tried the whole thing about getting together with a small group and taking a little bit of mushrooms. So, but I feel like I do other stuff. But you know what I mean? But
let's do it. Really do small group chanting circle.
Yeah, actually, it makes me think. I wonder, you know, even though COVID stuff is still scaring people, like, people could in theory just do this on a Zoom together. You know what I mean? It's like the same thing. If you think of Field Trip or like Mind Bloom, like someone staring at you on, you know, with a phone, like while you're on ketamine, like that just is always just. Seems like a terrible idea.
I have now been to online ceremonies.
Interesting.
You know, actually most of them because
ceremony.
of yes, but actually it's funny. Every one I've been invited to, there was a reason why I couldn't really do the medicine. You know, but the last one I went to, I just sat there and meditated and listened to the song, you know, listened to the music. It was gorgeous. It was actually extremely powerful, and there was no medicine for me. I think I took like a little microdose, but I actually agree. The simplicity, you know, I was just telling someone over the weekend, one of my most powerful ayahuasca experiences was in the jungle when, during our days off, my shaman, as long as you've been there before, you can actually work with a microdose of ayahuasca by yourself. And the little microdose by myself, just hanging out in my tombo, was probably one of my more powerful experiences. You know, and there was no one. I mean, granted, it was different. It's like out in the jungle, and you know, very resourced with the shaman nearby. And it was, you know, a tiny little spoonful, but it was incredible. So there is a lot to be said for this simplicity,
Yeah.
you know. But Will, I would love to know, so what's coming up for you in the next, 6 months, year, 3 to 5 years, maybe 100 years?
Yeah, so
I would love to know.
yeah. So for
Yeah.
me, yeah, I mean, I've got my private practice. It's small, and I'm keeping it small for now because I want to, yeah, just do other things. I'm advising on a few companies, some startups that are related to psychedelics. So
Oh, wow.
like Bexon Biosciences, we're developing the subcutaneous form of ketamine and other psychedelics.
Wow.
I'm also advising a company called People Science, which is sort of trying to encourage more people to work on studies within wellness, not just psychedelics, but psychedelics, marijuana. But also, if you can think it like wellness has become this thing where there's zero evidence. And so People Science is trying to help, again, just lay people or lay practitioners, psychiatrists or chiropractors or acupuncturists in the community, or even wellness companies. We can compare, say, Goop's facial cream to Glossier's facial cream, and so it's actually just encouraging people to do research and publish it.
Cool.
And so, yeah, that's another fun company. I think so we're not
Nice.
just relying on academic universities to do the publishing. So that's something I'm excited about. And doing more writing. I want to do more public
That's
writing.
great.
Most of my stuff has just been on Instagram so far, but yeah, so I want to.
A book,
A book
maybe?
is in the works, but also, yeah, just more articles like this thing on integration. Like I want to just get more of this stuff out there, and so yeah, teaching also. I taught a little bit during an introduction to psychedelics course
Oh.
during quarantine, which went well. So I'm actually thinking about how can I structure this
Oh, that's
further
cool.
for more ongoing training for therapists that want to work with people with psychedelics or other healers. So yeah, more teaching and more
Wow.
education, I guess, is on the docket.
That's a big one. Teach the people on the ground, the people, the actual therapists who need to understand this on a deeper level. I mean, that's like train the trainer to train the trainer to train the facilitator, So, and I think that's how we'll get this out everywhere. But this is awesome, and I love that there's all this great stuff going on with I don't know if you're allowed to give the links to these startups
Oh
if
yeah, I
they're
mean,
public or
Bexon
not, but
is definitely public.
yeah.
They're pretty major. I mean, they're like one of the legit
Oh, okay.
pharma companies out there. I wouldn't say it just because I have stock, but they actually are. They're very mature. They've been in the game for like 7-8 years actually, so far before this became a thing. So
Oh,
people can look them up. But actually, I was thinking, yeah, Bexon, or sorry, the People Science. I was actually thinking it might be interesting for you to talk to them and maybe have them because they're entrepreneurs and they are. Yeah, two physicians that sort of left
yeah.
full-time medicine to try to push wellness and psychedelics. So yeah, I'm happy to introduce you to them.
that's amazing. Yes, it's interesting. I have a lot of not only I have a lot of clients who are trying to shift from traditional Western medicine into again, I'm like, I wish there was a better word for alternative medicine, but
Medicine
because
that works.
of these paradigms, yeah, exactly. And then I have one of my closest friends is actually a pretty big healthcare entrepreneur who has been doing like game-changing work out there on this planet for years. And it's interesting because I actually introduced him to Rick Doblin, and he's gotten involved in kind of like, where is this going and how do I want to
Yeah.
take, his traditional work and mix it with psychedelics and like
Cool.
this new paradigm. And it's so fascinating because it really gives me hope for the future of healthcare. I'm like, okay, things are actually getting better, even though we all question it. But I do believe that it's, like we're seeing this all
I hope we've
happen.
hit our rock bottom in Western medicine. So yeah, we're ready for transcendence.
No, totally. Every time I see him, I'm like, please tell me things are getting better. He's like, oh yeah. Because, it's like on the front lines. But awesome, Will.
Yeah,
It
it
was
was
so
fun.
great to have you here. We're going to put all our links,
Cool.
all your links in, all the profiles everywhere so we get it out. And it was wonderful to be with you here
fun
today.
as always. So thanks for having me, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank
All right,
you.
bye.